Hi, my name is Łukasz.
And my name is Pablo Galindo.
And this is the core.py podcast, a new podcast where we discuss internals of CPython and our adventures in making a new version of your favorite programming language. If you're not in the US right now, it might not be immediately obvious to you, but today is Pi Day. It's March 14th, which Americans like to represent as 314, like the number that represents half a revolution. But when I hear Pi Day, I hear Pi Day, as in Python Day. And so, today we have a special guest, Emily Morehouse-Valcarcel. She is a Python core developer, a sitting steering council member, a PSF fellow, and the chair of PyCon for the challenging COVID years. So, hi, Emily.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. We love to have you. So let's start with like a very generic question, because like that's the way we start to roll instead of like, having the questions that we think are going to be better. So let's ask you, what do you think other podcasts fail to touch on what you like to talk about? Like, so basically tell us the question that we need to ask you. As you see, that's how professional podcasters roll.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to kind of start it off. A lot of times people want to know about how I got into core development, or kind of like the other favorite technical musings that I might have at any sort of given time. I think one of the things that I could probably do an entire podcast on myself is just kind of what my like day-to-day looks like, and what it's like working for a really small company that does, 80% Python development on a daily basis for a really like wide range of clients and like customer bases and scaling sizes, and really what it's like to kind of get in from the very beginning of getting to like start off a product and then sort of scale it, but not by reaching that sort of like Silicon Valley sort of scale. So.
Emily, like I always wanted to ask, how does it feel to work for a small company that deals with many customers? And it's not something where you have like one gigantic client for a long time, but there's multiple technologies, you wear many hats, and so on and so on. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, for me, I think that it's really like the sweet spot for what I get to do with my time and how I get to kind of grow alongside the people around me. So a lot of our team members are typically very like mid to senior level. Consulting is not really like a great spot for junior developers. But there's always sort of something interesting to work on. A lot of our clients are newer and will, work with us for a year or two, but we've had some very long running clients that have been with us almost since the start of our company. So we're in a really interesting position where we sort of have to continue to deal with the technical choices that we make, and obviously support legacy software, but we do get a chance to start fresh so frequently, where it's, we're able to constantly be on the newest version of Python, the newest version of Django, and keeping everything as up to date as possible. So that's kind of one of my absolute favorite pieces of it.
Right. Maybe, Łukasz and I knew you for a while, so we already know the company, but maybe for the people, the listeners that don't know, can you tell like a bit what the name of the company? I don't think we have even say that, and maybe what you do, like what kind of services do you offer and all that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So I run a company called Cuddlesoft. We are a digital product development company, so we do all of the design services, product management, all the way through engineering, development, and scaling. Mm-hmm. And like I said, a bulk of our work is Python and JavaScript. Obviously, you can't really get away from that, being a company that makes web and mobile applications. Right. But yeah, we do a lot of React and React Native work. And our clients are really, really varied. Anything from arts nonprofits to healthcare to startups. We've even done a bit of like hardware and middleware work, which is really cool. Like getting into that sort of like physical world is always a nice change of pace. Wow.
Yeah. So you're saying you're working with JavaScript as well. Are there any features of JavaScript you miss in Python?
That's a great question. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but the thing that comes to mind that I really do miss is there's a really cool library that lets you manage your dependencies a little bit better. So a lot of times you'll need to, make a really small tweak on top of a library.
Right.
that typically what I wind up doing in Python is, forking that, creating a GitHub repository for it, maintaining my fork until hopefully that change gets merged back in upstream, or just kind of maintaining that in perpetuity. And there's a really cool JavaScript library that basically lets you store your Git diff alongside your library and then, or alongside your code base. And then you can basically do like a post install that just applies the diff to the library.
Oh, I see.
It's very lovely.
Like hot time patching, right? Or installation time patching, no? That's very interesting, actually.
Yep. So if somebody else built it before me, that's great. But that's one thing that I've been looking at doing once I have some spare time in the Python world again.
Well, clearly Łukasz is very smart asking this question to someone on the steering council.
Well, this particular podcast is now like me being outnumbered, right? Like it's 2-1 sitting steering council members to non-steering council
Okay, we will ensure to ask you a question at the end to see if you can maintain your employment.
Cool, looking forward to it.
Okay, so talking about like difficult challenges, is upgrading to a new version of Python in the projects that you run a challenge?
Upgrading Python is not the thing that's ever been a challenge. Luckily, we're far past the world of the 2 to 3 upgrade. I think the oldest projects that I've worked on in recent years are probably like a 3.6 that needed to get upgraded. So not a whole lot of pain points of going from 3.6 to 3.12. The problem is always upgrading dependencies. And so a lot of times projects will pin themselves to a specific version of Python. So you've kind of got to get all of your dependencies on board to say like, yeah, I can upgrade, especially if it's a larger jump. So yeah, dependencies is always the bigger issue. And then it depends on who deployed the project is really the big one.
Who deployed the project?
Yeah, whether it's one that like we deployed ourselves or if it's like a brownfield project that we inherited.
I thought that you were going to enter the blaming game. Like it depends on who is the employee that deployed the project. Okay, no, it's you or someone else. Okay,
yeah, and a lot of times, these days most of what we're deploying is all Dockerized onto a container environment, whether it's AWS ECS or App Engine for GCP or Kubernetes, like something like that is going to be containerized, and hopefully it's as easy as getting your Docker containers to play nicely. But anytime that you're using sort of like a more integrated tool, like Cloud Run or Elastic Beanstalk on AWS, like you kind of run into these situations where you don't have all of the control over it, and you're kind of making sure that it's going to play nicely with that development environment instead of just a free-for-all container that can live wherever you want it to.
Makes sense. I think we have Carl. We didn't ask, I think, the same question as it is, but like he mentioned that at Meta they take like, I don't remember the actual name, but like something like 2 engineer years or 3 engineer years to port. Probably Łukasz can correct me, or do the magic in post just to put the number there. But like I think that like taking the second person to come to the podcast, the question average to like is not too bad to move to a different Python version, I suppose.
Yep, and it always depends on how great your test suite is.
Yeah, that's always good if that helps. I now play with a lot of the tooling that we have around Python for Python development. So they're developed by a very small amount of people and used by also a small but very judgmental amount of people. So let me tell you, like, yes, who deployed it is really important. Like there's plenty of kind of different kinds of approaches to how we run our tools. It's getting better now, like with the PSF actually like now employing people to make this correct. But
wow, are you talking about yourself there or what?
No, I'm talking about people like E and people like Mike who is working on PyPI and stuff. So kind of things are improving clearly. But I might suggest the PSF also contracting Cuddlesoft for a bunch of things because there's a bunch of upgrades that are overdue. But I'm gonna mention this like later in the episode, about certain things that we need.
Maybe certain speedy things, Łukasz, is those things.
Yeah, like things in due time. For now, I'm a little kind of concerned about being outnumbered by all the steering council members that I'm looking at right now. So let's talk about that for a bit. So it's your second term as a steering council member, Emily. So how is it different so far from 2023? And what made you first decide to run for the position?
Yeah, I can't necessarily say that anything feels wildly different from 2023. I think that we have maybe just been working through a bit of a backlog, just coming out of the holidays and having to pick things back up. We've had a lot more sort of administrative work, which is always the boring part of any sort of council like this, or open source like federations and whatnot, is that eventually somebody has to do the boring stuff and the stuff that kind of keeps the thing running instead of just making decisions. And to that point, it feels a little bit political in some of the things that we have to do. But yeah, I think that overall it has generally felt the same as 2023. It's been a really nice shift from Brett to Barry, two of my sort of favorite Python people, and especially Barry. It's just kind of nice to have him around again. He was one of the people early on in my journey that really kind of took me under its wing. I remember one time, I think it might have been the core sprint back in 2018 that he had picked me up from the airport and was driving me someplace, and just sort of one of those people that just is really wise about life. And I remember, driving around and him talking to me about, his life and his family and the impact that Python had on him. And it was really one of those community moments. So yeah, it's really nice to have those people around.
Cool. Did he mention Tai Chi or a bass guitar?
Definitely bass guitar.
That's Barry.
I think we're still waiting for him to actually play the bass in any of the Steam Council meetings. I mean, I have played the guitar because, guitarists, we don't play the guitar in front of people, we explode. But I don't think Barry has ever played. Maybe we should insist him more.
Well, there's one person that can convince him, I guess, because I've seen on video in the background some of his bass guitars, but I also have never seen him play.
Or maybe they are only decorative and he's just pretending.
Did he play on the Zen side of Python, whatever we call that thing?
He sent something.
Yes, we trust him that it was him.
Yeah. To be honest, we trust everyone that they were themselves. So I suppose the people that were actually singing, like you, Emily, is more difficult to fake.
That's true.
But yes, it's him until proven otherwise.
We're just saying in a very awkward way that we would just like to see Barry play.
Yes.
That's essentially what we're saying.
Sorry, Barry. Yeah, we like you. We don't doubt your skills. But maybe if you saw your skills, maybe it's easier to trust you. I'm just saying.
Sounds like a great Pilates auction.
Yeah, right. Okay, so one of the things that a lot of people like from when we bring Carl is the war stories. Everybody loves a war story. So Emily, tell us a war story from your work. I suppose that, managing all these different clients and Django versions, I'm sure there's some nightmares there that you have to deal with.
I was reflecting on this a little bit, and I don't think that we've really had a lot of nightmares. There was one somewhat recently where we were doing a really big database migration where we were moving a client off of AWS and onto GCP. And it was one of those things that it's not like you only have one shot to do it. We could have rolled back and basically said, no, we're going to keep everything on AWS. This didn't go well. But oh man, I remember it was just one kind of overnight where there are just these really long running processes to do a database migration, and you get to sit there and you get to wait for 3 hours and then to see a failure, and you're like, oh my God, no. And it's just some weird idiosyncrasy between, Postgres versions or something, where something's not exactly set up properly, or there's a column missing or some weird permission that you have to sit and you wait 3 hours before you see it fail. And then it's okay, cool. Let me make this 5-minute change and try that again.
Right. And this was from the same database to the same database, kind, right? So from Progress to Postgres, just in different services, right?
Yep, exactly.
Wow.
So, I remember, I think one of my, best and worst qualities is how stubborn I am sometimes. So I want to say it was like 3 a.m. or something like that. And I was like, all right, I'm going to give it another hour. And then it was like super close. And I was like, I'm going to give it another hour. And it was basically down to the wire that I eventually did get it to work and got everything migrated over and everything was fine. But I like really desperately didn't want to undo those DNS changes and like point everything back to the old one and have to start over. I was like, no, I'm just going to fight through this and I'll sleep all day tomorrow and we'll deal with it then.
Yeah, I can definitely relate. Sometimes you just cannot give up. And you're almost like this guy who wrote the copy dialogue of Windows, right? Like, you know, where it's like, how long is it going to take? Oh, like 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 minutes, 5 days. Like, you never know. Like, you know, are you really far from actually finishing or not? Like, well, in computer science, you never know.
Have you ever done this thing? I mean, this is like when we discover like that Pablo is weird. Have you ever put this kind of like paper against the screen just to see the progress bar is actually advancing or not? Like, or is just me? Like, this is when I was younger and there was no other way to know, like especially with the Windows dialog for copy and it's stuck on like, you know, 63% and it's just forever there. And then I remember like, you know, desperately trying to know if it's frozen or is it just actually doing something. I just put like a paper against the screen aligned with the progress bar and like, you know, with tape around and to see if it's actually moving across it. But maybe it's just me being weird. So
no, but I highly recommend an app called Xscope. They used to have a free version. I think it's just paid now, but I use it as a design tool, but that reminds me of exactly that. You can basically set up like guidelines on your screen. And so it's just, you can have a digital paper to monitor your progress bar.
nice.
Ah, see, like a high-tech solution to your caveman solution.
Okay, thank you for confirming. Caveman Pablo. Okay.
I just use my disability. So like when I don't use contact lenses or glasses, I can just look at the screen up close and even the retina screen. Like I will see the pixels because I'm short-sighted. So I will see, you know, are they moving or not? And we'll just align something else like with the dialogue to see.
Well, this reveals that you don't have one of these mega fancy monitors with 6 million pixels, right?
We can have like another episode of like trivia about our setup, and I can talk about like my monitor. Like it's a rant, and it's gonna make like Apple like not sponsor Python anymore. Like when I actually say it. But are they sponsoring Python?
No, Apple sponsors nothing.
Apple?
Apple doesn't sponsor anything.
All right. So anyway, let's talk about Python actually, right? So Emily, you were there when Guido decided to step down from his position as BDFL, and now you're on the steering council. So when you put it like this, it sounds like a villain origin story. The woman who took over Python. So tell us how you did it.
Yeah. This one's really funny because I hadn't actually like put these things together. It feels like it's, you know, forever ago that Guido stepped down and that all of the PEP 572 stuff had happened. But yeah, it is interesting that I've kind of come full circle and am now serving on the steering council. And I think I was playing the long game because I actually ran for the very first steering council and was not elected, and then opted to chair PyCon for more than a few years because of COVID and how that kind of shifted everything. But yeah, what do you want to know?
You were involved in the change that was the most controversial change in years, right? And it wasn't like an entire shift of the language. It was a very pointed...
Say the name in Google.
Yes, it was a very pointed feature, right? So let's talk about like how they can both be true. Like a very specific feature that is used rarely, but when it does, it's helpful. But also the most controversial feature that was added to Python in recent years. So how did it work?
Yeah, and it's interesting to kind of put those two things side by side. So I was being mentored by Guido at the time, and his sort of final project for me was to implement assignment expressions, so implementing PEP 572. And at the time, I really distanced myself from the decision. I kind of held up this white flag where it was like, I'm just implementing it. Like, it's not my
I'm just
PEP.
an employee.
Yeah. And so I think that it was a very like controversial decision. And I think one of the times that the internet just kind of served to be a really terrible place, like all of the news articles and like blog posts that came up about it, I think sort of just compounded all of the negativity that was around it. But it really did bring to light the like emotional and mental weight that I think a lot of people didn't see that Guido had to go through making these decisions and kind of having to shoulder it and move forward.
Right.
And I think that Guido is very much and always had been very equipped to kind of handle those things, like just being Dutch and being the way that he is. I think that he, a lot of times publicly especially, did not come across as taking those things personally. But at some point it becomes too much, and at some point you just have to decide that it's not worth that mental energy, and you sort of can figure out a different way to be present, and how it can kind of bolster the way in which you interact with the community, or how it can be detrimental. And once it becomes detrimental, you kind of have to step away. So interestingly enough, I find that I'm sort of on the total opposite side of that now. Like, I feel like where I'm at with my like business life, I am a relatively new mom. I have a 3-year-old. So a lot of my like open source time has really shifted. So I find that I was really drawn to serving on the steering council because I find that I can have a really strong impact even when I don't have, 8 to 12 hours a week like I did before, to actually dedicate myself to contributing to the language.
Right. So the experience of seeing how the BDFL had to essentially, make the decisions by himself, and how that was taxing and everything. That was when you were a newcomer. Like, that didn't essentially just scare you off when you saw like the kind of worst kind of, I don't know.
Like how radioactive the feature was going to be, basically.
Right, exactly. So like that, yeah, like you went through this and you were like, yeah, I actually want more of
this. You could have been known as Emily the Bringer of Doom. Like, that's very badass. Maybe we should maybe do that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that I got lucky because I did get to kind of pick Guido's brain in those early years when he was mentoring me, where, he would talk about a certain PEP that he was thinking about and the reasons why he was leaning towards accepting or not accepting it, and kind of the thought process behind it. And I think that ultimately having a council where there's multiple people who are making the decision has, some very significant benefits, right? It's not a single person making the decision. It's a group of people. It feels a little bit more fair to the community, I guess, and maybe a little bit more balanced with getting different minds in there. And I think that there's also this sense of confidence that you get where I know that I can go to a steering council meeting and sit with 4 other incredibly respected people that are wildly intelligent, that bring a lot to the table for these discussions, to say, like, what are the pros, what are the cons, what are the things that each of us aren't thinking through, and know that we can have those conversations before a decision gets made, and know that it's not, somebody on their own having to make that call without that sort of discourse.
Yeah, that plays quite nice. I think I subscribe that a lot. Like, it allows also you to be more like stubborn, let's say, in a way, in the sense that if it's not just one person that needs to take the decision. If you you feel like, okay, this is the right way, absolutely. You cannot allow you to be that stubborn, because like you may be missing something. But having 5 people and that you trust, if someone says, actually, this is stupid, Pablo, like, we shouldn't do this, then it allows you to be a bit more like confident on what you say, just because you know that someone else will correct you if that's not the case.
But isn't it frustrating when you have 5 people and you have to convince like 4 others before you can actually voice an official opinion on anything? Like, how does that work internally?
I mean, I think the timing is hard, right? Like, even just when we get an email in, a lot of times we're kind of like having to come together and draft a response and have everyone approve it. And so it's harder to move fast with these things. But I don't think that we necessarily are ever like all on a different side or very controversial. I would say that probably, I don't know, maybe 70% of the time, the decisions seem relatively obvious, where we're either all on the same page or there's like very clear community support or something is just very well drawn out. So most of the time it's not, 1 against 4. It's all of us sort of, having a conversation, getting on the same page before making a decision.
Steering council, 70% of the time works every time.
No, well, like in the sense that, I mean, I think even when it doesn't work straight away, that is obviously that we all agree. Like, I never felt that having to convince people it has been a problem in the sense that, and many of the times, like even if you see yourself alone, I mean, in your opinion, like it's easy to drop it because it's clear that the majority is not users. You like, unless you really feel like there's really something missing, in which case it's just a communication problem, not a people problem. Like it's fine to say, well, if everybody thinks the other way, clearly that's the way to go, right? I don't think we ever had an impasse or like a blockage just because one of us says like, no, this is not the way to go.
And we always want to do what's going to be right for the community and the project as a whole. So typically there's a decent amount of consensus that moves us in the right direction with that in mind.
So that actually brings me to a thing that I wanted to touch on, which is that in your PyTexas 19 keynote, you said about PEP 572 that it's a rare sort of change because syntax changes don't happen often. And since then, we've seen quite a few changes, like there was pattern matching, built-in type generics, writing union types with the pipe operator, except star, the type statement, f-strings reusing quotes, and so on. So there's so many, I might be even forgetting one or two. So do you feel like the pace of change increased, or maybe the steering council isn't assertive enough? Like, what's your take?
Man, putting words in my mouth. Maybe the steering council isn't assertive enough.
It's all Pablo's fault. You can say it, Emily. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the changes that have happened, like some of those even that you listed there, were around additional support for other pieces of the language. So there have obviously been some syntax changes to further support typing. And I mean, as far as syntax changes go, there have also been some that we couldn't do before that kind of had to have the door opened by swapping out the parser. I would say that the syntax changes to the language have been relatively conservative. A lot of times it is trying to help match people's mental models of what they would expect from other languages or how they would expect Python to behave. I think that there have been some that, much like people push back on assignment expressions, that are maybe just a little bit more confusing, that you have to kind of construct a new sort of mental model of how the syntax works. And so anytime that something is like super complex that is going to be confusing for beginners, I do think that that's when you have to go, maybe we don't really need this.
Right.
But I don't think that there has been anything that has been like at the front of Python enough that is something that shouldn't have made it into the language necessarily. And that's, I think, where we have to toe the line of, is this something that's going to be really beneficial for a certain subset of use cases that's not going to have a negative impact overall, but that could be profound in certain areas.
Right. I would like to go back to PEP 572, which I don't think we have actually said the name.
Walrus operator.
Just to be clear. So my question is like, can you tell us like a bit how was the experience of implementing it? Like maybe like what were the biggest challenges when you implemented it, or what surprised you the most? What happened when you landed?
Yeah, absolutely. That was still is one of my like most favorite experiences that I've had. Because it was basically, Guido came to me and said, I want you to take this and implement it and figure it out. And, I'll be here to kind of support you. But it was really him kind of like pushing me off the ledge to go and figure this out and do it myself. And so these were back in our like co-working days, back when that was a thing. So I just remember like booking a conference room a couple times a week. And I had one of those like whiteboard desks. And I just felt like mad scientist. Like
whiteboard desk?
Yeah. Yep, whiteboard desk. I've got a great picture of this someplace. But yeah, it was just
my head is exploding.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yep. So it was really cool. It was really like one of my favorite parts of the language. Like I really love the syntax and the internals and figuring out how all of that worked. And for the most part, I think that it was a pretty straightforward experience. I think the trickiest bit from the technical side was figuring out the scoping rules, because there's this sort of like elevated scope of needing to kind of hoist back out of, an if statement, if that's where you're defining a new variable that's getting assigned to from an assignment expression. So it was like the perfect balance.
And it wasn't challenging on comprehension, right? Like, so there was some shenanigans afterwards that were not clear in the PEP, I think.
Yeah. So all in all, it was one of those, like, you can get 80% of the way there, and then the last 20% is the hardest part. But yeah, I had a great time doing that. I think the biggest things that came out of it were documentation. It was like 6 or 7 PRs afterwards that was like needing more documentation, needing to link to something else, needing to link to something else. And it was my first like major contribution to the language. So it was like, oh, I actually have to like touch the what's new and like add this. And I'm like, what do I write about assignment expressions in there? Yeah. And then there were a couple of things afterwards that you don't necessarily get to figure out all of the edge cases of how something is going to behave or how users are going to interact with exceptions. So I think there was a change to the actual PEP after the implementation landed, that we had originally exposed a little bit more of like a low level error for a target scope exception.
Yep.
That we opted to not expose that low level of an error, and just opted to do a standard syntax error, I think. But
Right. Yeah, I remember that. I think there was that change, and then the comprehensions one. That was the 2 big changes after you merged it.
Yeah.
I was dealing with the grammar. We did an episode. Last episode was on the parser, so I think it's a bit fitting the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I had gotten in there, and as most like language nerds would do, I had gotten in there and messed around with the grammar itself a bit before. So luckily, I was relatively comfortable getting in there and messing with it. I hear it's a lot better these days, though.
I mean, I cannot say, but yes, probably it's a bit less confusing, I would say. Actually, the Walrus has, if I recall, an L1 violation, right? Like, you need to, like, in the sense that you need to write like a more generic rule. I'm talking in the previous Roman, right? In the new one, like you could do like test : test, and the right hand side,
left hand side.
Yes, it needs to be like just a name, not a test, but you need to put test there, because otherwise there's like a conflict.
Yep.
I think that's one of the ones. So you see the first change that you did, and you need to deal with all the all the problems.
Cool. So PEP 572 is just one facet of what you were involved in back 3-4 years ago. Later on, you also became the chair of PyCon. And then everything got ruined because of COVID. So tell us a bit about the PyCon that didn't happen. So how would PyCon in Pittsburgh, led by you, look like if it weren't for COVID?
Yeah. I'm very excited that PyCon US is going back to Pittsburgh this year. The conference center itself is beautiful. It's right on the edge of this river. So there's, these big windows that you can go out and kind of look out.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing this.
For me, PyCon is at its core a celebration and a coming together of community. And I think that's what it really would have been. And I think what we really needed to kind of get back to post-COVID was being able to have that time and that space together in person. And I think that not being able to have PyCon US or any other conferences for a few years really solidified how important it is to see these friends and community members in person, and how much we sort of miss out. And so for me, it's really just that kind of celebration and coming together.
Wow. Yeah, I super agree.
So one question, like now that, since you implemented the Walrus, by the way, was it you who named the Walrus operator or like, what is the story?
I didn't coin the term, but
Okay.
I do think that I kind of grasped onto it and began using it sort of ubiquitously. So I would say that I pushed it forward, but I did not coin it.
It's very fitting.
Oh, I see. But you made a cool sticker, right? Like if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I have this little walrus that's like in this like biker vest with like tattoos and like a bandana around his neck with little assignment expressions or like little walrus operators all over it. Yeah. I still have a few left someplace.
That's cool. I have to say that actually the name is semi-official. I will say there is several places in the standard library when we say Walrus operator. Like some of them are tests.
Yeah, I mean, how can you be mad about that? Like the walrus operator, I hate it. Like, yeah.
I think it's absolutely fine. No, exactly, right. It's just that, maybe people think it's a cool name that people use, but it's not official. But I think at this point, it's the official name.
Yeah, maybe the PSF's next hire is going to be a marketing person to handle the PR on all of our new controversial changes.
Well, I mean, I have like prescient, like, Polar Trade is in Dune, so I can foresee how people are going to ask this question, like just in case it's not clear, just because we are all of us here know why it's called the Walrus operator, but maybe can you explain explicitly why it's called the Walrus operator?
Sure. So the assignment operator is a colon followed by an equal sign. So if you kind of turn it 90 degrees, it becomes the two eyes and the two tusks of the walrus.
Now that, since you implemented the Walrus operator, you changed quite a lot how you approach open source and whatnot, and your relationship with the CPython project. So right now, to this day, right now, in this particular day of this particular year, what is the part of the standard library that you enjoy more hacking on?
Yeah, I mean, these days, I think most of my time is spent reading PEPs and looking at the work that other people are doing. So I really do wish that I had a little bit more time to actually do the hacking on myself. I think that I always have been really interested in internals. One of my very first conference talks was me like using the disassembler and looking at bytecode and how Python's AST is constructed. So those have always been the things that I've been more interested in. So one of the things I was just recently looking at is Irit is working on a visualization tool for like the compilation process of Python code, which I think is really interesting. So that's probably what I would look at.
She's going to present that at PyCon, I think, right?
No, we should go to her talk.
Maybe this is a spoiler. Well, sorry.
No, the talk is like published. The schedule is out there, so people.
Okay, I have to reveal this. Like, when I read this, the talk, it's like, oh, this sounds very cool. And I think C mentions the name of the tool there. So if you go to his GitHub profile, you can actually download it and use it.
It's not the first thing that we revealed on the podcast that wasn't public before, but now it is. So that's fine. It's fine.
What was the other one?
Well, every now and again you would be like, oh, there's a secret thing added to Python.
Right.
Now,
okay, but like that's me talking about things that I can like take responsibility, but like screwing up the big reveal of someone else's talk, like it will be not so nice. So maybe you need to add some sounds.
Okay. We are hacking on certain parts of Python that we like. We're hacking on the certain parts of Python that we need to work on, and we interact with people. Certain people are easy to work with, certain are not. It's life, right? So, Emily, do you think working on CPython is a good experience? Like, was it a good experience to you? Like, would you recommend newcomers to contribute? Like, what's your take on like this project being welcoming or not to newcomers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the community is very welcoming to newcomers. I think that the struggle is always how we can set newcomers up for success, because there typically is a pretty big barrier to getting in there and getting like your first meaningful patch for the language. And one of the things that I sort of always hated that I was told when I was first starting out by other people was, either go make documentation updates, which was like great, but that's not really like what I'm here for. That's not the thing that I'm like really interested in. Like I see the value obviously, but I didn't want to just be the person that was updating documentation.
Right.
Or it was like, go look at the bug tracker.
Oh.
And like, so it's such a terrible place to point newcomers, because it's either most of the low-hanging fruit is already taken care of by someone. So there's either really old issues in there that have a lot of complexities as to how they're going to get solved, or just deep areas that somebody has abandoned, or someplace new that maybe somebody's already working on. So I think that the best way to be successful is to really find somebody who can be a mentor, who can, much like what Guido and I would be remiss if I didn't mention Eric Snow as well. He was one of my other mentors very early on. But if I didn't have them kind of saying, hey, here's this thing that like I know about or that I'm working on that I'm going to actually hand off to you for you to do it instead of me doing it. I don't think that I would have been able to be nearly as successful as I have been.
Okay, so pairing up with a mentor is key to success.
I think so.
Right. So normally I don't think, I think we started the following question as like, imagine that you are in the steering council, but I think now probably it's a bit different. So let's say, imagine that you are in the steering council and all the rest of the steering council is like sick with some mysterious disease. So like you can take control over the whole thing and you can change one thing, the thing that annoys you the most about Python, like just like magic. So what will be the thing that you change? What is your biggest pet peeve about Python?
Ooh, I mean, I think this is the big, well, maybe not the big, but one of the biggest complaints that people have about Python, and one that doesn't necessarily have a clear path forward. But I think it would be packaging. It would be figuring out the golden solution for packaging.
I mean, I'm not going to say that your answer is wrong, but let's say, but that sounds like. I mean, I assume that the way you will do that is to say, well, like in the sense that what makes this answer like interesting, but like maybe missing for me is that you could say, oh, I will force them to do X. So then my question will be, what is X? Or that, because then it's like, oh, we will solve like a very complicated problem, but that's like how. So like we need more meat in the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was thinking of it as like, if I could make a decision that didn't have consequences, and therefore if I could like start with a blank slate, what would be the change that I wanted to see? Yep. Biggest pet peeve about Python.
You can change anything. You can like, remove features, add features, change how something works. But you need to say what it is, not like, I will improve X in mysterious ways.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of one right now. I'll let you know if one comes up.
Maybe what will help is if we flip the question and ask the opposite first. Like, what's your favorite change in Python in the recent years? Besides the Walrus.
Yeah, this one I actually did think about. So I have 3 that I thought about. One that I use surprisingly regularly, that I've reached for it a lot more often than I would have expected, is the dict union operator. So that was PEP 584. That's definitely one that's nice to have. And then semi-related, I think F strings was just great. Like a much better string template formatter. So F strings all day. And then especially the changes that we are able to get out of, bringing F strings into the grammar and having that be a little bit more flexible.
You are pro quote reuse or anti quote reuse?
I mean, there's definitely like an asterisk of like, you can absolutely abuse this.
No, not in the sense that obviously like, should we approve of the abominations that are possible right now, right? Like I'm sure with the Walrus, there is all these people that construct Fibonacci numbers in these comprehensions just by abusing the Walrus, right? But like the question is like, as a philosophical change, in the sense that you don't need to say, so in the sense that saying yes, I'm pro quote reuse doesn't mean that you will do it. It's just like no. It's a natural consequence of the grammar. That will be a pro quote reuse, right? Or you will say, I don't care. It's so obnoxious that I'm against it, right? So that will be anti quote reuse. So it doesn't mean that you subscribe using it in weird ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm fine with it as a natural consequence of the changes to the grammar. I also think that it's something that is not going to cause a lot of issues for people, especially with modern IDEs. Getting like the syntax highlighting for that right, I think is the biggest part. Making sure that it's not going to be confusing. But I think that our tooling is sophisticated enough to support that, so I'm fine with it. But I think being able to have a little bit more advanced usage of like nested expressions in f-strings was probably my more favorite part that came out of that.
Cool. So with those things in mind, now, what do you think? What is the most annoying thing about Python?
Core reuse.
Yeah, I don't know. I still don't really have one.
You're being very political here. You're like, I don't need to scare off my constituents, right?
Okay. Let's play the following game.
Oh boy.
Choose which one of the following options do you hate more. Like, doesn't mean that you hate it. It's just you hate more. Like, it's closer to you hating it.
Okay.
So the fact that function defaults, like if you put like a mutable object as a function default, it will be reused. So we know what the problem is there. That's option A. Or option B is the fact that you can absolutely resurrect objects in the __del method, and CPython needs to deal with that situation. And option C is daemon thread.
I'm going to go with option A because I think that that's one that is like the most likely to be encountered by somebody and have them not realize the consequences of it, unless you have the debug bear rule turned on, which you should. But
right,
yeah.
Łukasz, what would be your option?
Yeah. So first of all, like I was happy to hear about bugbear right here because that's one rule that I had to create because it was.
Oh, it was you.
Yes.
Oh.
Because it was coming up in code review at work at the time, like often enough, and I had to explain this all, every time that we just made this a linter thing. And now obviously everybody sees the warning, but it's in rough, so it's no longer in software I wrote, but it's still in use. It even has the same error code, so I'm happy with that. My pet peeve. And if Guido is now listening, he's like groaning already. Like it's the fact that strings are iterable by default.
Oh, for typing.
It ruins everything in typing. Because if you're like, I want iterables of strings, like, well, guess what? A single string is an iterable of strings. Ta-da! And it makes stuff like so much more complicated than it needs to be for this very cutesy thing where you can just say for I in a variable that holds a string. And it's one of those things where personally I will never be at peace with this. It's
it's also confusing for newcomers. You will see. I mean, I will say this, and you will say, no, this is not confusing. But like, put yourself in the shoes of someone who is learning the language, right? The fact that you have a string, let's call my string. If you do like literal square brackets my string, that is putting the string in a list of one element where the element is the string. But you call list over my string, then it creates a list of the characters, right? And that is like, it's a bit mind-blowing because people learn that, the square brackets and the list is doing more or less the same. In most of the cases, obviously, that's the same thing as with the string, so it's not like weird, but like people flip a bit out that you can like, why I'm getting the characters in the list, right? Instead of like error.
Yeah, but for me, it essentially was one of the big reasons why adopters of static typing were just using concrete types. Because the ABCs were just too annoying and had too many edge cases. And like iterable of string was like a major edge case where you couldn't really use it. So you could just as well say a list of string. And then everybody wasn't happy. Like I put a tuple here and now like MyPy isn't happy. Like, well, you could have one or the other, but then you're not going to find any issues.
But now it's time to surprise extra question. That is not on the Google Doc. So what is the PEP that you like accepting the most since you're in the String Council?
That I liked accepting the most.
That when you accepted the PEP, you say, yeah.
I'd have to go back and look at like what we've accepted.
You don't have like a feeling of one.
From a personal level, I think it was one of Eric Snow's PEPs for sub-interpreters.
It's about separate guilds per interpreter.
Right.
Yes, that sounds correct. I know he's had that work separated out into a bunch of different PEPs,
yes.
But that was one that it was really cool from a personal level because it was something that I had actually gotten to kind of work with Eric on early in my kind of contribution career. And it was something that I knew that he had worked on for so long that it was just really cool to finally see that piece of it land. I think I jumped on that one where I was like, yeah, I'll send the acceptance for that, because I was just so excited for him.
This is Pep 684 for the record. I think that's it for an interview.
All right.
Or do you have another super secret question, Łukasz?
No. I have everything laid out in the Google Doc that you now publicly mentioned, and it's going to be now in the episode.
Come on,
now
like, you're talking
knows
like if you cannot just modify all the audio and make you look smart.
We just seem like we are totally winging it. No, we're only half winging it. So Emily knows. Like, we had like a Google Doc prepared like an entire 30 minutes before recording. So we're total professionals here. Come on. And yet there's secret questions, but like
wait. Emily has not seen the Google Doc?
I just got it like 30 minutes before.
Okay. Because I was saying the Google Doc like it's a normal thing, because I thought Emily saw it.
She did.
Right, okay, this is normal, because like I look. No. I'm seeing in the. I'm very fond of this at work, by the way. I just go in the Google Doc and I'm looking who is operating Google Docs and all, and making my own version of reality out of that information. And I'm saying that it says anonymous crow, which by the way is a very cool. It's a very cool identifier, and I suppose that was Emily. So that was like revealing the fact that there is a secret Google Doc. It was not a secret.
No, it's a secret to our listeners.
No, but you can edit it, Łukasz. You're going to edit the hell out of this.
Certain things are going to be public now, whether you like it or not.
Okay. But we hide the important stuff.
Yeah, so exactly. Let's move to the scheduled part of the program.
PR of the week. So I only have one PR of the week, but it's kind of like fun. So this is GH115823. Doesn't matter the name. So this is of course one of these super tiny errors in the parser. But it is quite fun. It's quite fun for two reasons. So the error is actually that if you have a bytes object that has like a bunch of like unique, like incorrect Unicode characters, and like it just cannot be the code that like it explodes with some weird like error location. And the reason, whatever, is boring. But the reason I'm finding this PR interesting is because it's one of the changes that this PR, like the fix to fix this actual PR, is to remove one condition, that is, if there is any encoding, then do the correct thing. If there is not any encoding, then don't do the correct thing. And I wrote that code like 4 years ago, but this is the kind of like, why is this wall here? Like, you go to in the middle of the field and then you find this door, like just the door, nothing else. And then you say, why? And like, now you get this feeling like something is going to break if I remove this door, right? So I removed the door just to check what it broke. I fixed the problem and nothing else broke. So it's the first time in my life that I can successfully remove the door. I mean, I still don't know why I put the door there. So clearly the story doesn't end here. I'm waiting for someone to say, you broke my string decoder into something. I mean, the error is just the location of the error message, so it's not going to change anything. But yeah, I find it funny because it's the only time that actually you remove the weird thing and nothing breaks, which means that we have probably solved this bug in some other way, and this condition now it was incorrect.
Just wait until you hear from Stefan Benel, like that you broke something in Python now, because they actually did something to make stuff faster by accessing this thing.
No, I mean, it's just in the parser. So unless they are hacking the parser, which I don't think. Actually, they used to. Interesting enough, they used to have a whole copy of the LL1 parser and a fork of the pigeon. So that's not the new parser; it's the old one. For unknown reasons, like it was not even required to compile Python.
Yeah.
So you could compile Python with the funky grammar. I don't know. Maybe they were checking something, but I remember that I saw that and said, like, what is this abomination? Like, why is this here? Maybe we should bring Stefan just to tell us why they did that. But yes, I don't think this is going to break anything. Famous last words and all of that. But yeah, that's the PR of the week. So, if you are listening to this and I broke your thing, sorry.
Sorry, Stefan. Yeah, for me, I don't have a particular PR of the week, but I've spent some time working on python.org, the website where we host your downloads and also inform you about certain things related to Python. Well, the docs is a separate website under the same domain, but like python.org is the overarching website with a nice admin interface. Like we use it often. But I got pinged about certain things needing security upgrades for dependencies, so I started doing those. And in doing so, I saw that we are using Django 2.2, a version that is now end of life. So my question to the rest of the PSF infrastructure stuff, and in particular to E, was, should we be doing a Django 4 update? Should I do that so that we are on an upgraded version, on a version that actually sees security fixes? So he said, no, this is sort of far from what you should be working on in terms of CPython, but somebody should do this. And this actually sounds like a good project that is non-trivial and sort of has clear scope for somebody new to contribute in a way that has high impact, right? Upgrading Django on python.org. So if you go to GitHub python/python.org, spelled with no dots, nothing, like just python.org dot as a word, you're going to see the repository with our website. And the repository has a way for you to start a Docker container to see how the website works, to install all the fixtures and, with Postgres and everything. So you can actually run your own little copy to hack on it and see what's going on. Maybe that's your project. Maybe you can actually contribute to Python that way, to create a PR to upgrade Django from 2.2 to a version that is not end of life yet. And preferably is not going to be end of life in 3 weeks, which is going to be true about Django 3.2. So yeah, like call to action, I guess.
Cool. So now it's time for
What's
Going on.
in CPython.
what's going on CPython. You're missing the C in the secret Google Doc that doesn't exist. Okay, let me take the faster CPython ones.
Let's go.
Okay, so in the faster CPython ones, this is quite funny to say. The biggest improvement right now is that if you run one of the versions with no-gil, sorry, should I say free threading? I said
Yes.
the secret words.
We need to use the beeping again. No.
To gil. So in that case, we disable all optimizations because that's the right thing to do. Apparently, no. It's just
Specializations.
yes, all the specializations. But the specializations are a kind of optimizations. No, Łukasz?
Yes, but there's a Venn diagram, and the circles are not the same circle, right? Like specializations are only some of the optimizations we're doing.
Right. So we disable the specializations.
Yes.
But
why?
Why exactly?
Why do we have
Because
to
they are
do
not
this?
thread safe. Oh no. So there is an issue. It's BPO 115999 that is dealing with the problem, and the first way to deal with the problem is disable all of them.
Well, yeah. Let's be correct first, and then be
Makes
fast,
sense.
right?
Yes. But yeah. This was actually being in the no-gil pep that some of these optimizations will be obviously not thread safe by starting, and since we are already dealing with a lot of changes that are ongoing, makes sense that we are starting with disabling all of them to be correct and not dealing with magic crashes and then enabling one by one. It was surprisingly easy. Like it's a super simple PR because you just need to modify by core code, which is the code object headers, just to not enable the optimizations in the case. But yeah, that's great. Then another interesting change that happened from our favorite person, Mark Shannon, is to make the micro instructions a bit faster. This is for the tier 2 interpreter work. And this change is basically to determine like what of these micro op are escaping or not. In particular, if some of these micro instructions are marked as escaping, this means that there is values that can be outside and whatnot. This forces two instructions to be emitted. Like particularly one sets the instruction pointer and the other checks the validity, which is expensive, obviously. And the PR just deals with some false positives when a micro instruction is marked as escaping, but really it's not escaping. And the other optimization that Bram Booker made, to this day, I'm still unsure. Like every time I say the name of Bram, I'm still unsure if I pronounce it correctly. I think I am, but Bram, just yell at me if I'm not. So Bram Booker, he made an optimization on the JIT compiler. That obviously all this is still ongoing, but the optimization is that sometimes when we write instructions that are going to emitted, so particularly, the templates in the JIT, some instructions have a jump to the next instruction, which is a bit weird because normally you will just execute that. But this is needed just to ensure that the control flow makes sense or when you construct it, because it goes from specific structures and templates to the actual instructions as a linear array. And obviously, that is just a matter of ensuring that the control flow makes sense. But from the executing perspective, it makes no sense because you can just go to the next instruction, which is what you will naturally do. So this PR that Brand made basically checks if the jump is the very last instruction, and in that case, it just continuous execution instead of doing the jump, which is faster.
Right. Let's talk about free threading changes. See, you don't even have to beep out any word. Free threading. Just rolls right off the tongue. So I am obviously subjective, but I do feel like this next change is going to be the most talked about because it was already kind of front page of Hacker News and, all over Twitter and whatnot, which is a change made by Brett Simmers where now when you build Python with -- disable GIL, you can actually run with -x-gil equals 0, which will actually now cause for the GIL to be disabled. So, does it work?
Yes. No?
It disables the GIL, but it's not entirely done yet. We're not done yet with making everything thread safe and everything connect together quite yet. So
let me guess, something crashes in the test.
Yes, you can run some of the tests, which ironically are the ones that don't do any threading. But for those that do, and test asyncio is one example where it has a helper thread for child processes and a helper thread for closing sockets and so on and so on. So for those, we still see crashes. But we can now actually test how far we are, and we're getting there. So it was sort of seen as this announcement of the future is there. Now we can disable the GIL. Well, not quite yet. We just now can see what happens if you disable the GIL. And now we can see that we are not ready yet to release. But, well, we're going to get there in time for beta 1.
So funny thing here, I have several people that reached to me to say that they tried the no-GIL builds. So this is just compiling before this PR, obviously, with does disable GIL. And they were like, yeah, man, it's so much faster. So either they did shit and they try nothing, or it's just placebo. The GIL is placebo.
Oh, yeah. Obviously, that psychological effect, when something is, newer is important.
Look, without the GIL.
So every time Apple releases a new macOS, you will hear somebody says oh, it's more snappy.
Right.
This is even this joke, literally that term. It's it's snappier. So, Python 3.13,
snappier.
It's snappier. Even if it's not built with -- disable GIL. But for some of the surprises that you discover when free threading is introduced to Python, I discovered that thread handle objects themselves weren't thread safe.
The threads themselves are not thread safe.
So you would expect that, come on, at least this technology that itself is about threading would be thread safe, but no, it wasn't. So now, thanks to Matt Page from Meta, they are. And this had this additional advantage that now thread objects in threading PY don't need a separate join lock because you can just use the fact that the thread handles are thread safe. So that's actually great. We're both fixing correctness and making things simpler from the Python end. So and speaking of making things thread safe, sets now are, and the remaining list methods that I mentioned a few episodes back that, list has this massive API surface. So now this entire API surface is thread safe. This issue is closed. And some optimizations were already started on that. So list get item ref optimistically avoids locking, and list new and list clear now use the quiescent state-based reclamation that
quiescent.
we mentioned last week. Quiescent. It's awesome. So now the third group of changes, the rest.
Yes, the miscellanea, which still sounds very offensive to everyone else that is not working on these things.
We're sorry.
But one of the biggest changes that we have, I think it's also important to mention this, is that it's in the security realm, which is that the default SSL context flags are now a bit more secure. In particular, they perform stricter validation with one of these security stupid names that is verify X509 strict. Which is about like CA certs and whatnot. But I don't understand anything about security. I'm a compiler person, so it's like YOLO mode all the time. But for all of you that you care about this, so this is I heard this is important.
Yeah, security defaults are important to get correct because a lot of people don't understand the consequences of setting different values. So yeah, like making the default stricter is the smart way to do it, even if at times it's inconvenient because something is going to fail that didn't used to fail. Or like you might remember when we started actually validating certificates and suddenly you have to deal with this during development, it is sort of annoying, right? Because now you have to think about the certificates, but that's only training for the real world where actually if certificates don't end up, being validated, like that's not good. You don't want to actually essentially disable this in production.
Right.
Right. So speaking of networking, asyncio has had a custom REPL since 3.8. So you could say Python -m asyncio, and that would just start what looked like a regular interpreter. But in that interpreter, you could just say await something, like, right in the top level, and it would automatically do something that would allow this await to finish, which was very convenient because you don't have to wrap everything in asyncio.run. So now sys.dunder interactive hook is executed at startup of this REPL, which was like a long-standing issue. Now this is done, which makes it quite a bit better. And now, my unexpected question to our special guest. Emily, what is the interactive hook in sys? What is it used for?
So I will not lie and say that I didn't have to do a little bit of research on this very unexpected question. But essentially, the interactive hook that's now called is part of the startup of the interactive interpreter that is exposed so that the user can actually modify what this hook does. So you can modify your Python startup file to customize this behavior, but the introduction of this back in Python 3.4, if I'm remembering correctly, enabled tab completion in the interactive interpreter. So I'm curious if this was a blocker for the asyncio custom ruffle for having tab completion.
Yes, that's how this was discovered. That in Python -m asyncio, tab completion didn't work by default. And annoyingly, neither me or Yuri did know it because our Python startup files predated interactive hook. So we had
excuses.
RL completer just put in our Python startup file. So for us, that was working anyway, but for everybody else, it wasn't. So that was one of those things that taught me to always test with my entire environment removed because I have too much like custom stuff. Like to this day, if I used my PDB-RC during test runs, the test will fail because my PDB-RC has like some code in it that causes the regression tests to fail. Awesome. So that concludes our special Pi Day episode. I hope you weren't too disappointed that there were neither any pies or pies or pies. That's a heavily overloaded word in this language that, you can spell things in different ways and pronounce them the same way anyway. But you should definitely celebrate this special day by either doing something with the digits of pi, something fun and unexpected,
Right.
write some Python, or maybe both, or just eat some pie. That's you. For us, we're really glad that we got our special guest for today. Thank you, Emily, for joining us. That was great.
Thanks for letting us have a little bit of fun with the terrible way that Americans format dates. And thank you so much for having me today.
Spot on.
All right, so that's our episode. See you in 2 weeks.
2 weeks. In the next episode. See like what's happening in 2 weeks.